Good afternoon, first and second graders. We are going to go start on chapter 6 in our America book, and that is going to be on page 117. And we're going to be talking about the American West, building a railroad. For many years, the way to travel to the American West was by wagon train. By 1830, however, a new form of transportation had come to the United States, the railroad. At first, railroads were just short lines between two cities, but soon they stretched from the east all the way to Nebraska. People began to dream of a railroad that would connect the east to the west, all the way across the country. It would be a challenge. The railroad tracks would have to be laid across the plains and then over rugged mountains. Turn the page. Two railroad companies began work on this huge project. It was a race to see who could lay more miles of track. The Union Pacific Railroad started in Nebraska and worked west. The Central Pacific Railroad started in California and worked east. Many people who came to America to find work and a better life were the builders of this great railroad. It was often dangerous work. The men worked through hot summer days and cold, snowy winter days. Their hard work forever changed how people traveled in America. As the railroad tracks were being laid, people continued to move and settle westward. Native Americans called the train the iron horse. Trains were more powerful and faster than wagons, but the railroad caused problems for the buffalo herds the Native Americans depended on. Hunting buffalo was an important part of their way of life. Indians used buffalo for food, clothing, and even shelter. As more and more settlers began coming to the West, soldiers and Native Americans fought many Indian wars. Many promises, called treaties, have been made between the Native Americans and the United States during America's growing years. The United States government believed it was buying land from the Indians, but Native Americans did not think of land as property. Many thought they were only sharing their land with the United States, not giving it up. This caused many misunderstandings. Many Native Americans felt they couldn't trust the settlers anymore, so they began to fight with them. Many people became afraid of Indians. Soldiers began to force Native Americans to move off their land. Many people forgot that there were still Native Americans who were kind and peaceful. This is a sad part of America's history, for America has always been the Native Americans' home. It took many years to finish the Great Railroad, but in 1869 the Union Pacific and the Central Pacific met in Utah. The railroad was almost finished. Just one more spike was needed. While people cheered, a railroad leader drove a golden spike into the last rail. The railroad was finally finished. People could now cross the United States by train. That's about 3,000 miles. Can you imagine how it changed the way people could travel? The railroad forever changed the American West. Okay, so let's look at some of these questions. Number 1, what did workers build to connect the East and the West? A railroad. What two railroad companies worked to make a railroad connecting the East with the West? The Union Pacific and the Central Pacific. What were some of the challenges that the railroad workers faced? It was hard work, it was dangerous, and they worked in all kinds of weather. What did the Native Americans call the trains they saw? Iron horse. And what was the very last railroad spike made of? Gold. All right, let's turn the page. Now we're going to be talking about cattle ranching. So some words to look for and to listen for are bandana, lariat, and livestock. And livestock means farm or ranch animals raised for profit, which is money. The railroad changed many things about America. One of those things was the way people ate. The people of the East did not have much beef to eat, but there was plenty of beef in the West. After the Civil War, railroads made it possible to take cows from the West to the East. The West had good grazing land. Texas was overrun with wild cattle. If a man wanted to have a ranch, all he had to do was round up as many wild cows as he wanted. Then the rancher would brand each one to show that he was now the cow's owner. Each rancher had his own brand to show which cows he owned. Brands were made up of signs or letters. The brand was burned into the hide of a calf or cow. A cowboy's job. In those days, there were no fences. The cattle would roam wherever they wanted to unless someone watched them. Men called cowboys were hired by the rancher to look after his branded cattle. They also protected the herd from cattle rustlers who might steal livestock. A cowboy dressed for his job. Everything he wore had an important purpose. A cowboy hat protected him from sun and rain. A bandana kept dust from getting into his nose and mouth. Chaps protected a cowboy's legs. Boots kept a cowboy's feet in the saddle and protected his feet. Spurs helped a cowboy signal his horse during very noisy cattle drives. A lariat is the rope cowboys used to lasso stray cattle. A saddle was not only where a cowboy sat during the cattle drive, it was also his pillow at night. So this is designing your own brand. And this is something you can do just for fun. So you'll need a paper and a pencil. So imagine that you are a rancher and you're going to use your initials to design your own cattle brand and then write the name of your brand. Let's look at some questions. What were men who looked after cattle called? Cowboys. Describe one thing a cowboy wore and tell why it was important. Well, the one thing I didn't know was chaps were actually to protect their legs. I did not know that. And why do ranchers need cowboys? Well, there are no fences, cattle would roam and stray, and livestock needed to be protected from rustlers. So let's talk about cattle drives. Not many towns in the West had railroads. The towns that did have railroads to take the cows to the east were called cow towns. Dodge City, Kansas was a famous cow town. A rancher would hire cowboys to drive the cattle to a cow town. How long did it take to drive the cattle from a ranch to a cow town? It usually took about 4 months. For 4 months, the cowboys would see nothing but each other and, of course, cows. The cattle they looked after were called longhorns. Can you see why? And we're going to pause here for part 1.